Keep in mind, when we make these fish, they do not have to be anatomically correct. They do not have to be perfectly correct. If they're not, it's not a big deal. It's more just to give the idea or the impression of an animal that we might find in the ocean. So as I'm going through this, I'm not really referencing exactly what this fish should look like. You know, I've kind of got a picture of the thing that I drew, which was based on another animal. You know, so that's one thing to just kind of keep in mind. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and make my side fin here, okay? And then I'll make the eyeball as well. The eyeball on this one is actually pretty large, but it doesn't stick out that much. So I'm gonna make it kind of flat. And all I'm doing is just taking a little rolling pin, a little dowel here, to flatten out some clay. If I really wanted to, I could use the slab roller, but for something this small, I don't think it's really necessary. And I also wanna kind of get a different thickness than what the slab roller does. The slab roller does one perfect thickness, which is good for a lot of things, but for this, I want it to be a little bit thinner. All right, so I'm gonna kind of just do like a little bit of a clamshell design. Okay, I call it a clamshell just because it's kind of like that. And then I'm gonna kind of place it and see if that will work, okay? And that, I think, is a little bit on the large side, so I can trim it down. And don't be afraid to go big at first. You can always make things smaller. It's a lot harder to make things bigger, or you just have to cut a new one. Okay. So I'm gonna kind of give it a little bit of a flare here. And if I want to change the shape of it a little bit, I can use a little pinch technique. Okay. So you can see how that's kind of starting to shape a little bit. Down here, I want this to come out a little bit more. And then maybe I can trim that. And I'm just kind of making this up as I go along. Remember, this is not a real fish. This is just a fish out of my own imagination. I'll give this a little bit shorter. And I think that would look good like that, okay? So now I have the challenge of making one that's exactly the same. And that's gonna be fairly easy just because I can go ahead and roll this out to about that same thickness. Okay, that's the biggest thing. Notice that as I'm rolling it out, I also flip it over frequently. So maybe like 1 or 2 rolls, out and back, okay? And then, because this is gonna be for my other side, I flip this over a lot of times, because what happens is if you can just continue to roll it back and forth, it'll just kind of sit there. Oops. And the clay will just get lumpy, okay? As you're rolling it, it'll also stretch a little bit. So that is why we flip it over frequently. All right, so that's about right. So what I can do is I can just lay this one on top of here and then use that as a template, trace it out. And if it's not exactly identical, not the end of the world, but we want to get it as close as possible. That way, if you look at it from one side or the other, it's going to be the same. Okay, so those look pretty darn close. Okay, this one might be a little bit on the thicker side, but I'm not worried about it. Okay, then we're gonna go ahead and make the eyeball, which I'm just going to go ahead and cut a circle out. And then I'll use that as a template as well. Now it's just a matter of score slipping and smoothing these pieces on in the right spot, and then we'll go from there. All right. That one's a little bit on the bigger side. We'll cut a little bit away. And actually what we can do is we can actually just pinch that to make it just the right size. There we go. So now I've got 2 eyeballs that are about the same size.